Hello and welcome to La Excellence Hyderabad and Bangalore. So this is the daily news analysis for 27th April 2020. The news discussion is divided into two parts: daily editorial enrichment program, which basically covers the editorial articles, and then the rest of the important articles are discussed under targeted news analysis. Please have a look. So let's look at the first article for our discussion. The title of the article is The Edge of a New Nuclear Arms Race. The syllabus connection has been listed here along with learning objectives. Please have a look. Now let's move on to our discussion. So what is the gist of this article? This article basically talks about the poor performance of CTBT, which is the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. In order to understand what this article is trying to tell us, we will first look into the background of CTBT. What is CTBT? CTBT is basically the measure that has been taken up internationally in order to stop the nuclear arms race. But was it the first measure to do so? Certainly not. It was the first measure to do it comprehensively, but even before CTBT, there were certain treaties which tried to limit the nuclear arms race or the nuclear testing as such. Like, for example, we had the Partial Test Ban Treaty, which was launched in 1963. It tried to ban all kinds of explosions, all kinds of nuclear explosions underwater and in the atmosphere. But what is the loophole in Partial Test Ban Treaty? It did not prevent any kind of nuclear explosion underground. So by exploiting this particular loophole, different countries started conducting nuclear explosions, especially underground. And so in order to plug this loophole, the world came up with what? CTBT. This Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty basically tries to ban all kinds of nuclear explosions anywhere and everywhere. Nuclear explosions as in nuclear testing anywhere and everywhere. Now the question is India a member of CTBT? Of course not. India is not a member of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. This is an important point which could figure out in your prelims examination. If the option is about whether India is a member of the CTBT or not, India is not a member. Now why is India not a member? India is not a member because India feels that this particular treaty is quite discriminatory. It divides the world into people who have the nuclear power and who do not have the nuclear power, and those who do not have the nuclear power, they are not allowed to have nuclear power even in future, even if they have hostile neighbors, and so on and so forth. So this creates a clear discrimination between nuclear haves and nuclear have-nots. Now what does India want? India wants a situation in which there is an overall disarmament. Those who do not have nuclear power should cut down their testing on nuclear power, and those who have nuclear power like USA, UK, China, etc., they have to disarm themselves. This is what India wants, but this is something these 5 countries which have nuclear power will definitely not agree to. So CTBT has not been signed by India. This is some basic background about the CTBT as such. Now we will move into what this article is trying to tell us. So recently a report has come up in United States. United States has come up with a report, and this report basically says what? It says that China might be conducting nuclear tests. It might be conducting nuclear tests with low yields, of course, and this is violation of CTBT. And in addition to this, US report also says that Russia has already conducted such nuclear weapons experiment. So this is basically a violation of CTBT, and despite having a comprehensive agreement like CTBT, these countries are still conducting tests, which proves that CTBT is not functioning well. That is one point this article tries to tell. In addition to this, the article moves forward and tells us why CTBT lacks authority. It so far has said that China and Russia have conducted nuclear tests in violation of CTBT, and why are they able to do so? Why is CTBT so weak? That is what this article is trying to talk about. So we'll clearly understand why CTBT is weak. In order for CTBT to come into effect, there is something called the entry into force provision. This provision basically talks about the criteria that are required for CTBT to come into effect. For this to happen, important 44 countries have to sign this CTBT, but the truth is only 36 members of these 44 members have signed the treaty. Even those who have signed the treaty have not ratified the treaty. Like for example, China, Egypt, Iran, Israel and US. If you take these examples, they have signed the treaty but they have not ratified the treaty. And on the other end of the spectrum, there are countries like India, Pakistan and North Korea who have not even signed the treaty. So for this CTBT to come into effect, the consensus or the signing and ratification of all these countries was required, but a good number of countries have not done so. That is why CTBT lacks much authority. So in this context, what is the impact of such a phenomenon is what this article is trying to talk about. Firstly, if there is a comprehensive test ban treaty which tries to ban nuclear testing as such and it lacks teeth, or is it not into good effect, what happens? There is obviously going to be a case of nuclear arms race. USA at the moment, USA basically has come up with a report which says what, that China and Russia are conducting the nuclear weapons experiment, and in retaliation nuclear arsenal of USA might be increasing in order to give response to this particular nuclear testing. So USA basically might expand the role of its nuclear weapons, and in response the other countries might also start increasing their nuclear arsenal, and this might lead to a nuclear arms race. This is what this article is trying to tell us. Now let's move on to the next article. So the title of the present article is Safe Written. The syllabus connection has been listed here along with the learning objectives. Now let's move on to understand what this article is trying to tell us. So this article basically talks about the safe return of the migrant workers. We all know that India is going through a lockdown for quite some time now. We have had an almost 31 days lockdown in the country, and because of this lockdown a lot of migrant workers have been stranded. They are away from their native place and they are basically at the place of work, but because there is no work they basically are stranded. So in this situation the migrant workers should be allowed to get back to home is what this article is trying to argue. Now let us see why this is the case. This is the case because these migrant workers as such do not have any kind of social security. Even if there are government schemes and so on, these people do not participate in these government schemes. So these people would be better off if they go back to their native place, because the social security nets are stronger there. Because if they are closer to their family, if they are closer to their friends and so on, if something goes wrong with them, if something happens wrong with their health, these people will be able to take care of them. So it would be wise for us to allow these people to go back to their native places, and this is especially important because at this point, because of lockdown, there is definitely a loss of livelihood. So these migrant workers who are stranded here, they don't have any source of income, so they have no reason to stay here. In addition to this, even if they were to stay, they need to have adequate amount of sanitation, food, etc., which the government is supposed to provide, and it is going to create some amount of stress on the government. So, and that is not good either. And whatever relief that is being provided at this moment, that is very inadequate and insufficient is what this article is trying to tell us. And because of all these reasons, it is wise to not let them stay in the places where they are staying now. They should be allowed to go back to their home so that they would be closer to their family, they would be closer to their friends, and access the social security nets that are there at that point. In addition to this article basically talks about a way forward. It says that once these people are allowed to go back, they should be allowed to participate in the works at the ground level, probably by starting work at Manrega, and ensuring that these people get adequate amount of payment as such. So these are the two important points that this article says. Firstly, allow the migrant workers to go back home, and secondly, start reviving Manrega so that it will be able to provide employment, especially in the rural areas, when these migrant labor return back to their homes. So this is the gist of this article. Now let's move on to the next article. So the title of this particular article is basically Protecting the Poor from Becoming Poorer. The syllabus connection and the learning objectives for the same have been listed here. Please have a look and let's move forward to our discussion. So this article basically talks about the protection of poor in the context of COVID lockdown. Because of COVID lockdown, a lot of negative impact has been made, especially on the poor people. Those who are transiently poor have definitely become poorer, and those who are actually poor have become very poor. This is what this article is trying to establish. Firstly, if you look at the morbidity and mortality rate, which is related to the rate at which people fall ill or the rate at which people die, this is basically very high in countries where there are poor people, and also this is higher in poorer people. So basically there is higher morbidity and higher mortality when it comes to poorer people, because they are not able to handle the situation well. So if they get affected by the COVID, they do not have enough money to get the treatment done. Even if they go to the government hospitals, which are already over occupied, they are not going to get enough treatment. Because of all of these things, there is a delay in treatment, because of which these people are basically dying or falling severely ill. This is what the first point is. Secondly, if you look at the poor people, these people are more prone to getting this disease because they have poor immunity. Why is that the case? Because they have not had enough nutrition in their lives since their inception, as in since their birth. These people have not had good amount of food and in adequate amounts in terms of proteins, vitamins, minerals, etc. Because of these reasons, their nutritional value of the food is poor, because of which their immunity is poor, and because of this they are basically more prone to this disease of COVID. This is the second point. And the third point, where do these poor people live? These poor people basically live in crowded settlements, probably in slums, and even if they are not slums, they live in peri-urban and town like areas where the population density is high. And because COVID is a flu like disease, it basically has higher propensity to transfer from one person to another person, especially in areas where there is high density of population, and those areas which are those which are essentially occupied by the poor people. So this is the third point. And fourthly, they do not have enough access to safe water or sanitation or quality healthcare. This is another problem they face. And in addition to this, because of COVID lockdown, they do not have their jobs. If they are daily wage workers, they are not going to their jobs. If they are construction workers, all construction is stopped. And if they are Manrega workers, the Manrega work has been stopped. Because of all these reasons, they do not have any proper source of income at this point of time. So this is a severe loss that they are facing. Like for example, studies show that in times like this, poor people lose at least 50% of their income, at the least 50% of their income. So whatever they earn is very less. That is what happens with the poor people. And even in that earning, if 50% of it is lost, it is going to hurt them very badly. That is what this article is trying to tell us. In addition to this, it also talks about the long-term impacts of such COVID outbreaks or any kind of disease outbreaks on a poor person. Like for example, these people have not had enough nutrition. These people have had poor nutrition throughout their life, throughout their early childhood, and in such case, if they get affected by a disease like COVID at a young age, the impact of the same is going to stay with them for the next 1 decade or so. That is what an important research says. So it basically says that they are basically prone to having the negative effects for the next 1 or 2 decades, and that is going to affect their cognitive ability and also their income, and as and when they become adults. This is another problem they face. And in addition to this, if the poor person is a pregnant woman, this pregnant woman, if she gets affected by COVID, her child will have trouble for the throughout her life, is what this article is trying to tell us. So basically this article mentions or lists down the different kinds of impact, the short and the long term impacts on economically vulnerable population. So now that it has talked about the impact that this kind of disease is going to have on poor people, and if we look at the impact, we realize that it is basically a very negative impact. So it is our duty to protect these people. That is what this article says, which is why the title of the article, if you have a look at it, it says protecting the poor from becoming poorer. So, what is the way forward? So, the way forward is basically a set of measures that have to be instituted. Like, for example, you need to give a set of relief measures. You need to provide them with income security, food security, and a nutritional security. In addition to all these things, if they get hit by COVID, they have to have some kind of health security. So, all these things are important. But most importantly, the essence of the article is the following: if these relief measures are given, they are not supposed to be temporary. They are supposed to stay with these poor people for quite some time. We also need to extend the relief measures for a longer duration, especially maybe for about a few years, is what this article is trying to tell us. So what this article is trying to tell us in essence is that these poor people are prone to having negative impacts of such disease outbreaks, and because of which we have to extend our relief measures to a longer duration. That is what this article says. Now we'll move forward to the next article. So the title of the present article is CERT-IN to conduct security audit of the COVID-19 data. The syllabus, connection and the learning objectives have been listed here. Please have a look and let's move on to the discussion. So this article is basically related to the sprinkler deal controversy. We have to understand a brief background about the sprinkler deal controversy in order to understand the gist of this article. So what is the sprinkler deal controversy? It is basically a deal that has been signed between Kerala government and a firm called Sprinkler. So Sprinkler is basically a US based technological firm. Kerala IT department has hired Sprinkler in order to handle the health data of the people that are there in Kerala. About 1.75 lakh people's health data is being handled by Sprinkler, and this data that is being handled by Sprinkler does not have any individual consent. Like for example, this data which is collected has not been given individual consent is what this article is trying to tell us, and that is the basic controversy of Sprinkler deal. The data which is being handled has not been taken with the consent of the people, and this violates the norms of privacy and so on, which are very fundamental, especially after the Puttaswamy judgment. Right to privacy is a fundamental right, and in this context, if the government is hiring a particular company to handle a set of data which has no consent as such, that is going to create a problem. So certain allegations have been levied against the Kerala government. Firstly, in giving this particular deal to Sprinkler, which is a US based firm, due procedure has not been followed is one of the allegation. Where is the tender? Firstly, a government has to set up a global tender for which different companies will come in and they will start competing among themselves, and among them you are supposed to choose the best player. But directly choosing Sprinkler, what is the procedure that has been followed? Nobody knows, and this is one of the allegation. In addition to this, if the company is basically handling a crucial set of data, because it is handling the health data of COVID patients in relation to grassroots level people and so on, if it is handling this kind of data, it is supposed to be tested against the criteria of privacy, and this has not been done. In addition to this, if you want to sign a particular deal like this in which you are giving an outside firm a chance to basically handle the private data of people, before you do that, you have to make sure that you have exhausted all the domestic options, and Kerala government has not done this, because before going to this foreign firm of Sprinkler, it should have first looked into Kerala state IT mission, because that also has the technological capacity to handle such a data, and also there is Center for Development of Imaging and Technology, and this body also has the capacity to handle the private health data as such. So there was no need to employ an outside firm and basically strike a deal with it, giving lots of data of about 1.75 lakh people to this outside firm without taking the consent of the people. So this is basically a problem. So this is the basic background of Sprinkler deal controversy. This is basically related to what the idea of privacy and how the data is going to an outside tech firm. In this context, what does this article say? This article says, in the wake of this controversy, as a response to this controversy, Kerala government has basically allowed CERT-IN to conduct a security audit in relation to the deal that has been struck between itself and the Sprinkler deal. So the agency will have to execute the security audit of the data stored in the Amazon cloud platform, whether this data that has been stored on Amazon cloud platform in with relation to Sprinkler, is it in line with the guidelines of the government, is what this security audit will do. So this is the idea, this is the gist of this article. So Kerala government has come under these allegations, and in order to wring itself free from these allegations, it is trying to go through a security audit. And who is conducting this security audit? Computer Emergency Response Team. This is what this article says. Now let's move on to the next article. So the title of the present article is Yemen separatists declare self-rule in the south, and the syllabus connection and the learning objectives have been listed here. So this article basically talks about the recent developments in the Yemen civil war. Whatever the article says, it is mostly ball by ball commentary, but what is relevant for our exam is the brief background that is required to understand this Yemen civil war as such, so that we will be able to write a mains answer if asked. So what is the brief background for this Yemen civil war? This Yemen civil war has started in 2011. What happened in 2011 in the Middle East, which was phenomenal? It was the Arab Spring. Arab Spring was basically a set of revolutions in which people wanted to have a democracy, and at the top by replacing the dictators as such. So similarly in Yemen, if you look at the kind of uprising that was there, it wanted to remove the long-term dictator Mr. Ali Abdullah Saleh, and in place of Mr. Ali Abdullah Saleh, his deputy was supposed to come into power, and this person was Mr. Mansour Hadi. So in the Arab Spring of 2011, Yemen has removed its president Mr. Saleh, and they have placed Mr. Hadi in place of Mr. Saleh. And this political transition, which was done by people, it was done in the hope that Mr. Hadi would be able to bring in good amount of reforms in Yemen. But this was not the case. Mr. Hadi turned out to be incapable of handling the situation in Yemen, especially the political tensions that are there, the corruption that is there, the food security problems that are there, and the militant attacks that are there. All these things have not been adequately handled by Mr. Hadi. So this created a problem. Because of his incapacity, because of his inability to fight these problems of corruption, militant attacks, food insecurity, etc., a civil war has come into place. So fighting began in 2014, especially between the Shia people, Shia Muslim rebels and the others. And these people, the Shia rebels, started capturing different parts of the country. By taking advantage of the new president Mr. Hadi's weakness, they have started capturing different parts of the country. So first they have captured northern Sada province, and then they move forward and unfortunately have captured the capital itself. The capital Sana'a itself has been captured by these rebels, and this forced the president or Mr. Hadi to go outside and live in exile. And in addition, and in support of this person, in support of Mr. Hadi, Saudi Arabia and different countries have come together in order to fight these Muslim rebels, Muslim Houthi rebels, whoever are basically are fighting against Mr. Hadi. These people are basically the targets of Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia, along with Mr. Hadi, is trying to fight these rebels. So that is the basic brief background of Yemen civil war. Now we will move forward to understand what this article is trying to tell us. So this article does not have very good points as such which are relevant for prelims. So the most important thing, the basic idea from this article is that the Southern Transitional Council, which is basically one of the rebel groups that are there, one of the Yemen separatists that are there, they basically have declared a self-rule in the south. So this is another problem which the Saudi Arabia and the Hadi union is going to face, because they are already fighting the Houthis. They are now also supposed to fight these people. So this is what this article is trying to tell us. Now let's move on to the next article. So the title of the present article is Executive is better suited to deal with the COVID-19 crisis. The syllabus connection for the same and the learning objectives have been listed for your benefit. Please have a look before we move into the discussion. So COVID-19 has basically affected the country in a negative manner, and the executive is doing its best in order to handle the situation. Firstly, it has set up a lockdown in order to prevent the COVID-19 crisis from spreading. In addition to this, whenever people go out, and if they go out, they basically have to follow the norms of social distancing, and we are basically looking for a staggered exit out of this particular lockdown. These are the basic changes that have been done by the executive in order to handle the COVID-19 situation. But some people are not happy with this kind of decisions that are being taken by the executive. They are wondering why the Supreme Court or the judiciary is not taking things into charge, and why is the judiciary not entering into this arena in order to handle the situation in a better way. And this answer to this particular question can be seen from this particular article. So what is the highlight of the article? What are the highlights of the article? The article says that this is not the time for courts to assume charge or to dictate priorities. That is not the job of the court. This is the job of the executive. And when the executive is not able to do so, when there is a vacuum of what has to be done, only then the Supreme Court or the judiciary can chip in. Otherwise, the Supreme Court has to maintain its independence, has to maintain its distance from the executive, so that executive can function well. And that is also what the doctrine of separation of power talks about, right? Then who gave the doctrine of separation of powers, by the way? It was given by Montesquieu. Mr. Montesquieu, he was a French philosopher. And does India have a separation of powers? Yes, in some manner. And what article talks about separation of powers in India? Article 50 of the Constitution talks about the separation of powers in India, especially at the district level. So these are some facts which I listed for you all. Anyway, so we'll come back to the highlights of the article. The judiciary has said that the executive is doing a good job, and the executive is better equipped to handle the situation better, because executive has the power of 3 M's. What are these 3 M's? 1, money; 2, men; 3, material. So these are basically the resources that are required to handle any situation. And because COVID is a very big, a global problem, and in order to handle this problem, the first thing you need is the resource. You need doctors, you need health professionals, you need people to manage the movement of different kinds of patients. And if you want to move patients from one place to another place, you need logistics. All these are basically coming under executive. And in order to do the testing, in order to produce more amount of testing kits, or if you want to import it from outside, for all these things you need money. This is also something the executive has. In addition to all this, in order to maintain the law and order, etc., you need the power of the police. This is also a power which is held by executive. So by looking into all these factors, we can say that executive is better equipped to handle the situation better. It has the power of 3 M's, which is money, men, and material. That is what this article is trying to tell us. In addition to this, some separate facts have been given in relation to how the judiciary is functioning. So the first part of the article talked about why executive is better suited to handle the situation, and the second part of the article is talking about how judiciary has evolved itself in situation of COVID-19. So what is the judiciary doing? The judiciary is basically changing the way in which it is hearing the cases. Previously, we all know there used to be a system of open court system, in which people used to come, they used to be physically present, and their cases were heard and so on. But at the moment, right now, they are basically going for video conferencing, and the virtual courts are basically open as all the stakeholders, be it the litigants, be it the lawyers, court staff, and even the media. All these people are basically present in the live reporting, and the live reporting of the media is also done. And this is the kind of evolution which the judiciary has made. So this is a nice change that the judiciary is doing because of the COVID. Every crisis is an opportunity, and the crisis provided by COVID has been an opportunity for the judiciary in order to move towards more digitization of justice. This is what this article is trying to tell us. Now let's move forward to look into the next article. Here comes the last article for the discussion. The title for the article is Industries Hobbled by Curbs on Mobility of Men and Material. The syllabus connection and the learning objectives have been listed here. Please have a look before we move into the discussion. So this article basically talks about how the industries have been facing a lot of disadvantage because of the COVID-19 crisis. We all know that the COVID-19 has also come with the lockdown which the government has instituted, a 31-day lockdown that has been going on for quite some time now. In this context, if you look at the way in which the industries have been performing, they have been performing very poorly. This is mostly because they were not able to produce any goods because of the lockdown. People or their workers could not come to the factory. They could not move to the industrial complexes. Because of all these things, no goods were produced and there was no profit as such during this time of the lockdown. This is one part of the article. And secondly, the recent steps that have been taken by the government, it said that the government is basically going to ease the industrial movement from now on, especially after April 20th. Some essential sector businesses in rural areas, in addition to this, some construction activities, and also some information technology industries, some of these companies will be opened up so that the economic activity can resume. But there is a problem. So on the one part, on one hand, the government is trying to resume the economic activity by allowing these essential businesses to perform. What are these essential businesses? Like I mentioned, construction, information technology, and those related to rural areas. So these industries are basically being opened up, but there is a problem. What is this problem? The problem is there is problem of movement or commutation or transportation. In order for these industries to perform well, people should move from one place to another. Especially the workers should be able to move from their homes to the point of work. This is not possible because the transportation is not yet fully opened up. And so even if the easing of lockdown is taking place in the industrial complexes, this is not creating much benefit, is what this article is trying to tell us. This is proved by the recent survey that has been taken up by the Confederation of Indian Industries. This Confederation of Indian Industries has come up with certain metrics, and using this metrics, it is trying to tell us that because of transportation lockdown, these industries are still not performing well despite the way in which the restrictions are being lifted up by the government. On one hand, during the lockdown, they did not perform well anyway, and now even if the restrictions are eased, they are still not able to perform well because of the transportation problems. Especially the same is being explained in the help of certain metrics. Like for example, 46% of the firms 46% of the firms said that the permits to operate were either delayed or not made available. So the government is basically allowing them to work, but in order for them to allow to work, they should be given a certain pass that so and so industry can function. But these passes were not given. These passes were not being given, and even if they were being given, they are basically quite delayed. So this is another problem that is being faced. And in addition to this, 42% of the firms, that is 42% of the firms, said passes to workers were either not readily provided or delayed. So this is related to the workers. So firstly, the 46% metric was related to the firms as such, and this metric is basically telling us that the passes to work for the employees was not being provided. So, and in addition to this, there are certain metrics which talk about the daily commutation of workers, the hardships they are facing, the hardships they are about to face, and because of all these reasons, the industry as such is going through a difficult time. That is what this article is trying to tell us. So we finish the daily news analysis for the day. Thank you for your participation. We'll meet again tomorrow.